guys, it's Professor Morissette. This is week 2 and we are meeting only online this week. We're not meeting in person. And so what I like to do on the weeks that we don't meet is I like to do a little video review of the PowerPoint, kind of point out some things that are important, and give you like an online lecture. Now again, remember you have the PowerPoint, and so you don't have to worry about taking copious notes. I'd really love for you to listen and kind of immerse yourself in it. So let's begin. Chapter 2 this week, we're learning about the legal team. And so we want to learn about all the different types of personnel in a law firm. And we want to talk about their job duties as well as how everyone interacts and functions with each other. All right, next slide. Okay, so one of the things I really personally noted throughout my career is that if we don't put a lot of time and effort into law office management, it really decreases the amount of money the law firm can make as a whole because people can't be as efficient. Let's think about that statement. So we talked last class about how, you don't want to usually see no HR department. It's really good to have people that are specialized in that rather than have the attorneys try to handle it all, because it takes away from the time that they can bill and make money for the law firm. So that's kind of the perspective that we're coming from here. All right, so legal team members, it really depends who all is involved depending on the type of law, depending on the size of the law firm. So one thing we're always trying to think about in this class is potential for future jobs. So one thing that you could potentially do after you get some years under your belt is you could think about paralegal management. The University of San Diego was actually thinking for a while that there was enough of a market that they could offer a master's in law office management. I think there's definitely a market for it. I just don't know that a master's was what was needed, so that I don't believe is going to happen there. But there's definitely a need for people that understand paralegals, understand the law, and can help manage them. All right, so one of the primary positions in a law firm is an attorney, and they can be the head of a legal team. Remember, this is a national book, but they can also be kind of like part of a legal team too. And California has some of the highest numbers of attorneys in any state. And this is really interesting because the state bar for years has tried to limit the number of attorneys in California. In fact, the two hardest bars in the nation were California and New York, in large part because there were so many attorneys. The state bars were actually trying to limit the number of people that could come in as attorneys. Now think about that. Attorneys have to pay, hundreds of dollars a year to the California State Bar, and this is an organization that's trying to limit people coming in. It's kind of weird to have an organization try to limit the number of employees. Kind of bizarre. But recently, the State Bar decided to make the bar exam supposedly easier in California. It's going from 3 days down to 2 days. So we'll see if more attorneys actually do end up getting licensed here or not. Another thing we had started to allude to the first week of class was women lawyers and kind of their positions of power or lack thereof in some instances in law. So women are actually the majority now going into law school. That number drops as you get towards the end of law school. It drops still further after the bar. It drops substantially after a few years of practice. Traditionally, law has not been very conducive to having a family, and this is changing. My personal opinion is it's changing too slowly, but please always, talk about it with other people, get their perspectives as well. I know some of you are thinking about going to law school, so just something to think about. All right, so the main types of attorneys, if you will, and one of the sweetest jobs in the law is be known as an attorney who's a rainmaker. So what this refers to is somebody who can make it rain money, basically. Somebody who can bring in business. And there are paralegals that do this as well. And if you can bring in business, you're golden. So I remember working at this one law firm, and the other paralegal did absolutely no work. And I was a paralegal too, and I did all the work. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but she would be on the phone all day talking to her friends. She was friends with all these insurance claims adjusters, and they would bring in business. So literally all she did pretty much was call her friends and see how they were, and they bring business. And then I was in charge of doing the paralegal work. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then there's owners of law firms as well. Okay. Either as they own it by themselves, their partner, or they're part of a corporation that owns a law firm. So there's many different ways an attorney can own part of a law firm. And then the associates are really the workhorses, if you will, of the law firm, and often get stuck with the brunt of most of the work. So finally, we come to non-traditional. I suppose, in a way, I'm kind of a non-traditional attorney that, I work at a school. A non-traditional attorney could work in in-house legal department for a corporation, could go be a lobbyist, could do any sorts of other jobs. Law really does help prepare you either as a paralegal or a lawyer for a lot of different other industries. If you ever decide this isn't the career you want, it is something that really does help you move into other careers, I think. Okay, so letters after an attorney's name. I don't care. A lot of attorneys care, so it's important to know what these things mean, and I guess be respectful of that education. A JD stands for Juris Doctor, and they're not like a medical doctor, so they don't actually get called doctor. I think a lot of attorneys would like that. But that's what they get after they finish law school. That doesn't mean that they're an attorney yet, though. Now, if they decide to go into further school, they can also get an additional master's in law. So some areas this is really helpful. Like, for instance, most tax attorneys have a Master of Law in addition to their law degree. And that's about 1.5 years of additional schooling to 2 years sometimes. But for most areas of law, you don't have to do that additional specialization. ESQ, period, stands for Esquire, and that means that the attorney has taken the bar exam after law school in the state and is now licensed to actually practice law in that state. All right, so going into a little bit more detail about associates, because I think if we understand people's roles in a law firm, we can take that information and use it to our advantage. So associates don't get part of the profits. They get paid a salary. They might get bonuses. If they bill a lot and they bill over their annual amount per year, like maybe over $2,000 or $2,500, then they might get a straight cut of that. They typically have to bill a lot. There can be different levels of associates. You can read that for yourself on your slide. And the associates make a lot of money for the partners typically. So sometimes the partners don't want to promote them and have them be a partner that owns part of the law firm, because then they don't typically make as much money off of them. So you're not seeing as many associates get promoted into partner now, especially without buying into that partnership. Especially since the economy went bad, I'm seeing a lot of people hold steady at associate than I did before then. All right, so we were talking about non-traditional attorneys earlier a little bit. Now we're going into a little bit more detail. And a staff attorney is like, we were talking the first day of class, like working for Reddy's Children's Hospital. They're there all the time to handle any legal issues that come up there. And this is an area where you will see a lot of women because it's more of an 8 to 6 kind of job. You'll see more women attorneys traditionally. Special counsel is somebody who is affiliated with a law firm. They're more like a consultant. They're not an employee. And I've seen all sorts of special counsel relationships, so it's hard to really quantify it. It really is more on based upon the individual attorneys involved, how they arrange that deal. There's also contract attorneys, just like we talked about. There's contract paralegals. They can be self-employed and hire themselves out to other attorneys, maybe do court appearances for them. Paralegals can't do court appearances, but paralegals can work for different attorneys and work for themselves as well. All right, so your book, again, it's a national book, and one of the differences between national law and San Diego law is we don't really have a difference between an administrator and an office manager. They're kind of one and the same here, so like an HR person, and typically how it really works in San Diego is the managing partner or partners get together and tell HR who they want them to hire and fire, and then HR kind of makes sure that those desires are done in a legal and ethical manner within the law. Okay, next we've got our diagram. And the legal administrator or office manager, they can be HR, or they can also have financial, administrative, facilities, marketing, paralegal. What you're seeing more and more happening is attorneys, either if it's a big firm, they have an accountant on staff, or if they're a mid to small size law firm, they typically send it out to an accountant. Small law firms typically aren't going to have an HR department. Mid to large size will. Legal secretaries, you still see them. They're still very useful and helpful. You see more paralegals over the last 26 years that I've been practicing. Facilities is usually handled by the building, and most law offices rent. Some do own. If they own, then usually they'd be responsible, the law firm, for taking care of facilities, but most law firms do rent. Marketing, if it's a large law firm, they will have their own separate marketing department. Otherwise, it might be done by an associate, a paralegal. That kind of can get put on almost anyone. An HR or an office manager or paralegal manager will typically manage paralegals at mid to large size law firms, but not at a sole proprietorship. Okay, so talking more about the financial manager. So you might have an in-house CPA if your law firm is big enough, certified public accountant. If your law firm is big enough, then that person would handle all financial issues, bills, collecting on those bills. An interesting tidbit of information is attorneys are one of the least likely of all professions, like doctors and accountants, to get their bills paid. And one of the reasons for that is the really high ethical standards that we're held to. And if there's any questionable stuff in our bill, sometimes that gets ruled upon or not in the attorney's favor by the County Bar Association. So that can decrease the amount that an attorney gets in collections. If there's an in-house CPA, they would handle the payroll. But a lot of law firms don't want to have one person on staff. That's expensive. So like they'll do payroll through some service, or they'll combine that with their HR department. And maybe if they're trying to be cheaper, they'll have one company outside do the bills and collections. All right, human resources. Why this is important for you is because they will know about all your benefits. Typically, at most law firms, as being a paralegal, you get 2 weeks paid vacation. Depending on the law firm, that could include your sick leave, 10 to 14 days-ish. Also, sometimes I find with HR, you're more on a regulated system of looking at your performance and looking at whether you're entitled to a salary increase. Lawyers, if they can afford it, like to have an HR person make sure that somebody is hired and fired correctly. In the state of California in general, it is at-will employment, and you can be fired for almost any reason that's not like a protected reason, like you're disabled or for your gender or your religion kind of thing. HR can also help go ahead and interview employees, but you will find that most of the time your boss will typically want to hire you or interview you. They can also have an employee handbook, which is kind of like a contract between you and your employer. So if your law firm has one, you definitely want to read that. All right, technology. I just adore technology in the law firm. It has just, in 26 years, really made things so much easier, more effective. For instance, I mean, if you can just think of having to always go to a library and look up stuff in books versus just having it on like a special legal Google, if you will, called Lexis or Westlaw, it's just so much faster and easier. It's a lot easier for me to keep track of all my clients and their likes and their desires and when I should bill them, because different ones want to be billed at different time. And unless the law firm is typically really big, they're going to probably contract their technology out, which means like day-to-day, run-of-the-mill problems, the paralegals actually get to do a lot of the fix-it solutions. So like the copier breaks down. You get to try to fix it. The software's not working. You try to reboot the computer. On the good side of that is, you know, if you know technology, I think your job is more secure. So that's kind of a thing to take into consideration. All right, marketing. You know, there's rules about it. One of the things I do see some of our employers doing with former students occasionally is, for instance, having the student who's become a paralegal, hiring them, start passing out their business cards a little bit too aggressively. We're not really allowed to have what's known as a runner and a capper. So what that means is, like, I'm an attorney, you're my paralegal, I'm not allowed to really say to you, hey, you know, Joe, okay, I'm just making up a name here. Joe, will you take your business card and just start passing it out to everybody and really reminding people all the time that you work for an attorney and posting on Facebook all the different types of law you do constantly and sending people emails and sending people letters. And you have to be very careful about that kind of thing, especially at some place like a hospital. This hasn't happened to students, but there have been instances of people actually soliciting business at a funeral. I mean, how gosh awful is that? So there's very specific rules about when paralegals and attorneys and how we can market and advertise for new business. All right, the paralegal manager could be separate, could be like a head paralegal at your law firm, could be HR, you might just be managed by your bosses. So you need to figure that one out and maybe even ask in the interview. Okay, so what exactly the heck is a paralegal? So you have specialized training, and in the state of California, it typically has to be educational. This program qualifies whether we are ABA or not, and that's something that people don't understand. You can bill Business and Professions Code 6450 of the state of California. You can bill after you've had a certain number of classes, so your attorney can get money and charge you out to the client after you've taken a certain number of classes. If you had a certain numbers of years of experience, sometimes there's exceptions for that as well, but typically most people nowadays have to do it through their education. You do have to have some sort of supervision if you're doing anything that's more than just forms based. If you're doing forms only, you still have to be registered to do that. If you're interested in that, let's talk more individually. And you do real important work. You might summarize somebody's deposition. You might interview the client. So you're doing real important work, and the client can get charged and have to bill for that. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some of our data that I've collected. So the Paralegal Today magazine, I think, is merged, and I forget, maybe the Paralegal, not the Paralegal Educator, they merged, but you can still find them if you just Google them. And they come up with some data. So across the nation, about 50% of paralegals have a bachelor's. Only 11% have a master's. About 25% have an associate's. 14% have no degree. So you can have a bachelor's, a master's, and associate's with a certificate. So we have an associate's degree, which you have to get if you don't have any degree at all, or if you have an associate's or higher, you can get the certificate. So I think either way, you're fine. We talked the first class about how I love this career because you can make good money with an associate's even. You have to be able to do the work, and it's learning on the job, it's learning at school, it's being willing to keep learning. All right, so specialization. So some of the highest areas of law are here. You can just go ahead and read those. And unfortunately, some of our most loved areas of law, like family law and criminal law, are some of the lowest paid for paralegals. Now, immigration is not on here because immigration, like we were talking in the first class, can either be really well paid, like if you work for Qualcomm, or sometimes can be very low pay depending on if you work directly for applicants looking for some applicants looking for asylum. It's a matter of what specific type of immigration law you're doing. Okay, so where do paralegals work? The majority of paralegals are in blue, and they work at private law firms. Next is yellow, and it's the government. And then the smallest pieces of the pie are the orange and purple, which are self-employed or corporate legal departments. Okay, so what do you do? What are some specific things that you do? So you will go and file things at a court. You used to actually go in person. What am I talking about now? You just file electronically, duh. And you will be kind of like an investigator, and you will check what the client's saying to us. You will help prepare court documents. You will summarize things. You'll help manage an entire case. You'll help contact clients. A big, huge part of your job is making sure that we don't miss any deadlines, making sure they're on the calendar, so we need to do them. You can write letters and also do a lot of legal research. So, can I always guess how much, with like 100% accuracy, how much you're going to make? No. It depends somewhat on your education, your years of experience, the firm size. We know that most of us are going to stay in San Diego, but it also depends on whether you need to have health insurance, what kind of benefits you need to have. But we can make a good guess a lot of times. You know, no promises, but we can often make a guess as to what you might make. Another good thing to do is just ask. They'll usually tell you. Okay? So there are some other law office personnel you might run into. A law clerk is usually a law student, either interning or getting paid for the summer. A legal secretary does more focusing on typing and correcting documents and calendaring. The receptionist is the person that greets people on the phone and coming into the law firm. Only really big government jobs, or like the district attorney's office, or like big law firms have law librarians anymore. You're not going to see as many of these with the economy. It's kind of like a lot of these positions are kind of getting glommed together, just like any profession. Sometimes we will hire a private investigator. We still do have process servers for sure. Okay. And we kind of already talked about the slide and what law firms do and do not go ahead and outsource. All right, as always, if you have any questions, comments, and concerns, contact me. Have a good week. Bye.